We musicians are complicated creatures. Our passions for the music overflows into everything. As artists, we've got a lot to talk about. So let's dive right into today's conversation. Welcome to Conversations. Love, life, wisdom, and drums. Of course, today we're going to spend most of the time talking about some life things because I have my wife, Dr. Stephanie Bennett, today, who wrote a book. Let me have the book. That'd be nice to have. The book is Silence, Civility, and Sanity, Hope for Humanity in a Digital Age. So, congratulations on your new book.
Thank you, dear.
It's been a long time coming.
Oh, yeah.
A couple things, and I think these are really important. How is silence, civility, and sanity, how are they all related together to come up with a title like that for your book?
That's a really good question that you came up with there. I do want to say first.
That I came up with, yes.
Yes, I do want to say first, thank you so much for having me. And you guys who are still listening and you gals who are still listening, thank you for listening. It's a lot of fun for me when I think of you and I together behind the camera, or in front of the camera, I should say, or behind the camera doing work together, creative work together, because it's like all the kinds of things that we envisioned when we were kids, when we were in our 20s.
So playing together and hanging out together and
doing
performing together and playing gigs together. And
creative projects together. Like we could never have known 30, 40 years ago, like what technology would have been in 2022 or what we would specifically be into, but we both knew that we were both creative souls, right? And that we wanted to encourage one another and support one another in our creative endeavors. And thank you for having me and saying, hey, why don't we just focus on your project and your writing this time? Because that really blesses me and it's part of my fun.
Well, the whole concept of this channel is to basically be a positive influence in the world. That's been my goal.
Yeah.
I want to be a positive influence for drummers. I want to spread the love of God to others through my drumming and things I do. And you're one of my inspirations for doing this channel. I had just had an interview with Brian Gibbons, and Brian Gibbons and I talked about how you were one of the inspirations. You're one of the people that told me to do this, to get in front of cameras and talk. You could do that. So this is why we're doing it. But today I want to focus on your book. I want to focus on this new book called Silence, Civility, Sanity, Hope for Humanity in a Digital Age. You never make it easy for me to say the titles of your books.
At least it's not my dissertation, right? Which is like 30 words.
Yeah,
right?
I know. It's only 12 words in this one. I can't remember.
Listen, I have to have a long title because if you don't have the subtitle, Hope for Humanity, people might not realize that all of the issues that I'm bringing up and the cautions that I'm talking about and the problems that I'm talking about in our technological society could put us in a whirl of helplessness and hopelessness. I don't feel that way. I don't feel that there's no hope in the world. I think there is a lot of hope. And so I wanted to make sure to keep that in the title,
Well, let me step back because we've said the title 3 times now, and I stumble on it each time.
I'll hold it like this.
I'm not gonna bring the title up again. Okay, the title. We're done with the title. Promise, we're done with the title.
Okay.
What I want to ask you is, because I happen to know this, but the audience doesn't know this, is that your study of communications has been focused on something called media ecology. So what is media ecology? Because that's really the basis of this book, from what I understand.
Well, it is a frame. It is a frame that I've put the work in. The study of silence and the connection with sanity and civility is in the frame of media ecology.
So what is media ecology? Let's talk about that for half a second.
Sure.
You don't have to, not a long-winded, just if you were like talking to a bunch of drummers about what media ecology is. What is media ecology?
Okay. Well, I do find that over all these years of interviewing drummers and living with a drummer and knowing drummers, that drummers happen to be quite intelligent, curious crew. And so I'm happy to share media ecology. Media ecology is basically a lens of looking at the world and looking at the communication process, not just by what we're saying, like what we're talking, the actual words that are coming forth here and now,
Right.
but the channel, the environment. So in other words, our landscape in this nation right now, we have hills of green and mountains that are purple and oceans and highways. That's our external landscape. But I like to think of it as a media landscape, because there's also a lot of media that dot this environment, that dot this landscape. And so we're living, or we're embedded in a culture that is not primitive. It's not a primitive culture. It's not an unsophisticated culture. It's a culture with high tech, lots of media. And so that's part of our environment. So that's what I study. I don't study how a smartphone works. I study what happens between two people when the main communication practice that's happening is happening through a smartphone.
So you're studying how the media affects the environment we live in today.
How the media shape or reshape our perceptions, our feelings, our understanding, and our experience of reality.
Okay. So that's the framework we're talking under, and that's what we're doing. So you're more than a speech teacher, you're a communication scholar. And in being that means you're interested in speech. So what does that have to do with silence? Why is silence important?
Okay, I'll answer it in two parts. One, yes, I'm not just a speech teacher. Speech teachers have their own. I do teach speech, but I was never terribly interested in speeches and addresses, public addresses. I was more interested in the way communication shapes culture and shapes relationships. And so that's what communication studies do, and that's what communication scholars do. Okay, so yes. I think you asked how did I bring these together, or how do they come together? I'll have to go back a little bit and say 30 years ago, my interest in silence came through spiritual means.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was a very busy church lady kind of gal, a young lady who was busy doing everything in church, leading worship and singing, on stage, and writing Bible studies and leading small groups and many other things that you know about.
I know all about them.
You know all about them. And it seemed like there was a lot to do and a lot to say, but not a whole lot getting done that was spiritual, if you know what I mean. Not saying there were no spiritual things.
Doing.
A lot of doing, not a lot of being. So I began to seek the Lord and just go to him in prayer, not for things I needed, not for the list of things that I wanted for my family. I still did that too. Lord, help our family, help me, whatever. But I began to go to the Lord in quiet prayer and just kind of be before him. Just be quiet before him. Really, as the psalmist says, inclining my ear toward the Lord. And I didn't know that was called contemplative silence because I was in my 20s,
right,
my late 20s, but it was. And the Lord brought me to a place through regular practice of silence, even if it was just a 15-minute snatch of time at 4 o'clock in the morning. Don't get scared, anybody, But sometimes
just wait till you're 60 years old.
4
o'clock in the morning is no big deal. So
Right.
Tough thing at 20, though, I will say.
Right, especially when you have little kids and you're whatever. Sometimes it would be an hour, sometimes it would be 10 minutes. I practiced this over the course of several years till it became a rhythm. You know how like when you practice drums, you get to a place where you don't have to say, oh, I really need to go in there and practice. It's just natural. That's where you go and you hit it and you practicing paradiddles or whatever, it's coming out. That's what happened with this kind of silence, this contemplative silence. And Earl, it really changed it was really part of the transformation process in me to see that all these words that I valued so much. I was an undergraduate major in ministry and New Testament studies, right? So I care so much about the scriptures and knowing the scriptures and whatnot. But it seemed like God started to do more in my life internally in the transforming of my soul through silence and silent prayer. So that's where I got started in silence.
So you're saying silence came out of silent prayer, studying some of the contemplative mystics. I know you, Madame Guyon, and some of the others that you have actually studied that brought you to a place. And I think you studied some of the Quakers.
Yeah.
That in college you started to get into
silent worship.
Silent worship. So these were things that brought you to silence. And so, but how did you tie silence and seeing the need for it to happen in a society like today where mindfulness is now the buzzword, like
Right.
everybody's looking for silence, but social media is screaming at us all the time. So the idea that, and I know your book spends a good deal of time on social media. So if your book spends a good deal of time on social media, what's the tie-in of silence and civility and sanity? Back to the title again.
Okay. All right. Let me address that. Well, moving from the silence of contemplative, and I do have a chapter in the book called Contemplative Silence. It's just one chapter. It's not written specifically to a Christian audience, so it doesn't go deep into prayer. Right. But I also noticed that then into my 30s, I felt like I was learning. I didn't feel like this. I definitely was learning that sometimes I just needed to be quiet. Even though I wanted a seat at the table, or I had a seat at the table, or I had the answer, I needed to just tamp it down, let someone else speak. And the more I did that, the more I saw relationships building. And I saw that listening was really a very important communication skill. This was before my master's or my PhD. But listening, not just listening in the silence to the Lord, but listening to each other. And remaining curious and remaining open to the other instead of judgmental or quick with an answer.
So silence leads to hopefully dialogue and conversation.
Yeah, real conversation. And if we really start to converse with people and are interested in what they have to say, and this is the key where civility comes in, even when our opinions or positions differ greatly from the other, what can we learn from the other? How can we be curious enough instead of full of contempt or judgment or running to say something or correct that person, to say, what do you mean by that? Tell me what you mean by that. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. And cultivate strong conversation skills in a civil way so that dialogue can emerge and we can have more civil, and not just civil, but loving and kind relationships and more civil public discourse. Because look what's happening with public discourse out there. The polarization is off the chain.
Because people don't listen. It seems like we talk past one another.
Oh, yeah.
And the name of the show is Conversations, so we're trying to have a conversation here about your book today. But the topic we're talking about, silence, civility, and sanity, in a digital age, we're really framing it in the world we live in, YouTube, the world that you guys all watch me on, playing drums all day long, is we're really framing the fact that the problem is, from my perspective, is media allows me to say what I'm going to say, but it doesn't allow us to have dialogue, doesn't allow us to have conversation, and we hear opinions, but we don't hear dialogue, we don't hear exchange, we don't hear conversation. And the first good part of listening is silence. It's stopping and sitting back and not thinking about the next thing you're going to say.
Exactly.
But it's actually listening to what they say and then reacting to what you say. So with that as the framework, and I am working through some questions for a reason, because I want to cover a lot of things that are in this book in a short period of time.
Can I put a comment in there, though, for a second?
You can. Go ahead.
So,
your interview.
To what you said last time about listening, and I thought it was so important. It's very similar to something we do in music. If all you ever did was play the beat with no break, no rest, where would the dynamics be there? Would it be music or would it be monotony?
Excellent point for my drumming audience.
Well, I'm thinking of them.
And it is something that I talk a lot about because, I just came out of this interview today and we were talking about playing drum covers and emoting. Well, for me to play drum covers the way I play drum covers, I believe you have to be emoting. I think artists emote. Humans emote. Now, some of us are better at tamping down our emotions and keeping it down. Others just let our emotions go wild, and doesn't matter what we say and how we hurt anybody because it's all about me. But I think that a musician is somebody that's reacting to something. So you have to be listening to what's going on to react and emote to it. So that's what I try to do in every drum cover I'm doing, is I'm listening to the music and my emotions are coming out, and hopefully I'm playing in time, I'm playing the right grooves, I'm playing the right fills relative to what I'm hearing, my ears are hearing. So now we're talking about dialogue again, we're talking about conversation, we're talking about this digital age that we're in. And do you think that in this digital age that public discourse is broken because of social media? I mean, your book spends a lot of time on social media, and the main problem is this broken discourse. We're not listening to one another. We're not even talking to one another. We're talking past one another all the time. We're picking sides and talking past it. So how does your book address that particular topic?
I love that question, and I'll have to really be careful about how I answer it, because I could just now do a monologue for 15 minutes, and I don't want to. We're having a conversation.
Right.
Well, first of all, there is hope, because social media didn't create the problem. Humans have always had trouble listening to each other. We're always in our own head. Some people are worse than others. What has happened with social media is that it has upped and exacerbated the distraction quotient. The fact that we have so much more distraction, we have so many more like bings and flares and notices and alerts coming our way from all of our different devices. And some of them, many of them, in fact, most of them are things that we need to address. You know, who's calling? Think back to our early marriage. My goodness, in the 80s, we weren't constantly connected by the phone all day. You'd come home from work and you'd have dinner, and then the next morning we'd have coffee and we'd talk all about your day the day before. We talk all about my day the day before, because we weren't constantly, with each other through the phone and a text and sending a message and pick up this. That's changed. So
completely changed.
There's almost constant communication with the people we love and with others and with workplace, that leash, the 24/7 leash. And because of that just exacerbates the problem of distraction. So we are in a little bit, it's not the same, it's a little bit different situation because of social media. However, I don't think, in fact, I know this is not a static environment. We're not stuck here. Oh, social media, that's our whole environment now. That's here for good. That's changing. That's going to change, just like all the other, think about all the other media types of media and technologies and tools, the VHS, the DVR, all the different kinds of technologies that DVDs, I'm thinking
Blu-ray players, all those things.
Stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Like when it came, like CDs, when CDs arrived and we started not buying albums anymore, we had all these CDs. Okay, now the thing is CDs. So our whole, is CDs. But what happens 10 years later? Where are these 200 CDs, whatever? How great are they? Now we're using, Spotify, and I don't know. I'm just trying to say to you that
technology is going to keep changing.
It's going to keep changing. So I don't think we need to be despairing about social media. I think we need to be thinking critically about it and using it well and wisely. Not saying black or white, I'm not going to use it, or I love it, it's everything.
Yeah, I know that's not what your book says. Your book doesn't say that the social media is the problem. What your book really is talking about is how we cope with social media. I think that's where the silence comes in. Mm-hmm. And our ability to turn it off, our ability to listen to more than one voice, more than the voice of one side that we embrace.
Right.
That's the challenge in this world. Can I listen to other things other than the one point of view that I live from? And I think I was in the cable industry, the telecommunications industry for 35 years. And we were selling the opportunity, which we now have, to stream whatever you want to watch. You don't have to watch things you don't want to watch. You can only watch what you do want to watch. It's not like when we were kids and we all gathered around the TV and we had 3 TV stations to pick from. And we're going to watch one of those 3 channels if we're going to watch TV at all, or we're going to have to go in our bedroom and read a book or a magazine.
Right.
So now we've got all these options, but these options are polarizing us instead of causing us to have dialogue and communication.
That's right. It's natural, Earl, for every human being to want to mix with others who agree with them. and see things the way they see things. Okay, so that's completely natural. It's unnatural, and I'm going to say supernatural. We have to be intentional about this. And, you know, I'm sure there are people who are not Christian and not believers watching your channel. You know, but I'm talking to believers right now. We need to really pray that God shows us how to rise above the natural inclinations of media addiction and getting those endorphins flowing from our media and the distractions and whatnot. We need to do that.
So with that being said, we're not saying throw away media.
Oh no.
We're saying we need to healthy use the media. And we're saying that listening is part of this idea of civility and sanity. Listening, being able to listen. And silence is a part of it too. Every once in a while, turning it off is not a bad idea, because getting away from it will help us to keep our sanity.
Exactly. Right. Not just individually and in our marriages and in our communities, but in our public discourse, in our national conversation. We're not having any kind of effective national communication and discourse. We're not, it's ineffective. It's like I said, and you mentioned before, it's broken.
Right.
And so much of that comes from not just, yes, we're not listening well, but also not being curious. You know?
So what that leads me to is, there's a part in your book where you talk about silence, and is there such a thing as unhealthy silence?
Oh yeah. Think about some of those arguments we used to have when we were younger, where I would just close my mouth and walk out of the room, or you would close your mouth.
Okay.
That's unhealthy.
Right.
But then you can go from unhealthy silence to really toxic silence, which I deal with in chapter 8. And unhealthy, toxic silence is the kind of silence that should be speech, where you see someone being oppressed, you see someone being hurt, you need to speak up. You need to use your words, as we tell the little kids, use your words. We need to use the words to speak the truth. And that doesn't mean we need to be belligerent in speaking the truth.
Right.
You know, gentleness and calmness and patience are virtues. It does mean that we need to stop being a coward, to not just revert to letting a pool of toxicity or oppression or injustice circle around us, say at work or in the family or the wider family or in the community.
Right.
And step up. So that's a part of, like, we're teaching students to find their voice and to use speech, using the words wisely, is outstanding. I mean, I've been doing it, you know, for 20 years now.
Well,
but I'm trying to say, speech without silence is pretty much toxic too. Like, have you ever just been in a room with a bully or someone who takes over the conversation they don't want? Yeah.
No doubt about it. And if you're stuck in a room just listening, it's monologue, it's not dialogue.
Yeah, so we're not talking about passivity here.
Right. I mean, that's most of the people that get on a soapbox and live in one angle. They want a monologue. They don't want you to hear.
They don't want a dialogue.
Or they don't want dialogue. I think that's been part of the problem in the church, is that we have monologue mindset about a sermon, mm-hmm. instead of having conversation around a sermon.
That's right.
Because truthfully, what's the pastor saying, and then can we talk about it? Exactly. Now, of course, the format goes back to ancient Greek, and you would tell me where it started. You know, who started this idea of rhetoric and standing up there. And I think
the Socratic method.
Right. Well, the Socratic method's it's using questions to draw conversation into training. Right. I mean, that's what I try to do in teaching. That's what you try to do in teaching, is we try to ask questions to draw out response. But that's not the rhetoric, the rhetorical way of getting on your soapbox and preaching out to the world what they have to know, where there is no dialogue. And I think that's what social media has become. We think that when we write something on a post and we say our point of view, we really don't want anybody to come back at us.
Right.
We want basically everybody to just say, yes, you're great. You know, what you said is right. You know, we don't want the dialogue. So, and that's where a lot of the problems come in social media.
Exactly. And you mentioned the church before. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a change in the church in America where we would be spending more time trying to create a participatory culture in the church, as you're saying, instead of just a monologue with a sermon. And all the pastors who love sermons are like, whoa, you know.
But I mean, they unsubscribed a long time ago for me, but that's beside the point.
I try to create a participatory culture in my classroom where students feel like it's a safe environment to speak, to ask a question. And that is a lot of work in doing that. So I can imagine in a church or, even in Congress and the government, like trying to have a real participatory culture where everyone is heard and no one is being the bully pulpit. No one is overtaking. Right. That's difficult to do, but that's where silence can help us too, because silence changes us. It changes us from the inside out. And I think those of us who try to do better in life and live better and want to live according to following the Lord Jesus Christ, we want to do better. We want to live with him as our model, right? But we can't fix ourselves. Most of these desires, we try to fix ourselves from the outside in, but really where true healing and wholeness comes from the inside out. And that's why silence is such a good, strong antidote, not a panacea. I want to make sure I say that again. It's not the cure-all for our broken public discourse or a broken family communication, but it is truly a salve. It can, because it works on the inside of each of us as individuals, and we can't stay the same. We have to grapple with that inner dialogue and the things that are happening that we need to deal with on the inside.
Exactly. So this is not your first book. You've written other books. One called Communicating Love, which was written about relationships. But you also wrote some fiction books. One of them is called Breaking the Silence. So you tied silence. It was part of a trilogy of books.
Right.
Within the Walls.
Yeah.
Which is available on Amazon, by the way. You guys can buy it.
Or at Wildflower Press with Terry
Wildflower
Craig.
Press. That's correct. So are any of these books related to the way your current book was put together? Are they related in some way? I know the fiction, it was futuristic. It was 2071, and it was about a time where the where the media and the way the world was, the devastation the world went through, basically caused people to be within walls and not really communicating to one another. So what's the tie-in of that series of books, that science fiction, to this book, which is about living in today? Right.
Another good question, Earl. The tie-in. Well, I wrote those books in 2012, 2014, and 2016. That's when they were published. I wrote 3 different books. I wanted it to be one story, but every time I started it 10 years before, the story, every time I picked up that book to start writing this story again, the technology that I envisioned for 2071 was already happening.
Well, let me just stop you on this, okay? Number one, how much can one woman do, okay?
What do you mean?
Raising kids, getting a master's degree, getting a PhD, moving to Florida, watching your husband's career.
I know a big God.
Writing an album and singing music. By the way, that's available on YouTube. On my YouTube channel, you can go right there.
It's free.
Right. Toward the Lamb, and it's free, and it's on Spotify and other places. So when did you have time to write another book? You didn't really have time to write the book when you started writing the trilogy back in 2011, but it came to you, just like you never really have time to do this book.
Well, because that's what writers do. You know you're a writer if it has to come out. You don't try to be a writer. Oh, I wish I could be a writer. You're a writer if it has to come out.
Right.
If you can't do anything else.
That's my experience of it.
Right.
That's why I have a studio, by the way.
I know.
You got absorbed and it allowed me to spend time in my cave.
Is that why?
This is my cave, right? So
I love that you have your cave.
I
want your audience to know that.
We're doing this from the cave, by the way. This is from the cave.
We've got drums all around us, and isn't it lovely?
Right.
What was the question you just asked me?
Well, I want to see how they were related.
Okay, so
how are these books related?
Okay,
so I think they are. Before I get to the next question.
Okay. So I was working on my dissertation all that 2012 through 2008 or whatever it was. I couldn't write anything else but that 500-page tome. That's all I could do.
What's the title of that book?
That's called The Disappearance of Silence. Okay, and come on now, Earl. There's 20 words after it about Jacques Ellul and interpersonal communication, and I can't even remember them without looking.
All right.
All right. So I wanted to find a way that was not scholarly, that would reach more people who like stories and people who like fiction, to speak into the climate of the times, to speak into what was happening in our world. And so I had this story that emerged inside of me. My main character was Emilia. She still lives inside my head.
I know
some people are asking me, have been asking me, is there a sequel? Well, there will be. I think there will be a sequel because it's happening. Okay. But the second book in the trilogy is called Breaking the Silence, because it's when Emilia starts to come out like a caterpillar to a butterfly, in understanding that she could be a part of something, a community that really talked about things. Now that sounds strange, but this woman in the first book, it was really a prequel, was living in 2071 America, which was no longer the United States of America, because some big devastation hit that really ruined the whole country except for a little strip along the East Coast. And the government freaked and sent everybody inside their domiciles within the walls. And the technology was so good, it was beyond smart technology. It was embedded within the crania. Okay. And
right.
So
don't give the whole book away.
No, but if someone wants to read it, they can find it.
Right.
I was always hoping for that to be a TV series or a movie, but I don't know anything.
We'll
I don't know anything about screenwriting or about a TV series, so I just had to write the book. So,
the tie to the two books is.
I'm trying to get there.
Okay, I'm trying to help you.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get there. Just give me probably a minute to get there. Okay, so she is at the top of her game. She's owning a company called Travel. It's a travel company, a virtual travel company, and she makes these virtual vacations because no one can go out of their homes. And she something happens and she gets lost in the woods. She finds this community, and this community is outside. It's not Montana, but it's outside the East Coast. It's like Pennsylvania, and this group of 80 people are living like people were living in the 20th century. And they,
a commune.
Like a commune, but like people living off the land and caring for one another and discussing everything every night and just having a very strong dialogue, participatory culture.
Not getting propaganda from the government.
Right. Not isolated in their own little minds and their own little crania. And she starts to realize that she starts to break, the silence in her life starts to be broken. She starts to understand things. She starts to come into her own. Instead of kind of this, she's 29, instead of like this kind of dwarfed 14-year-old adolescent, because that's where her mind was. She just hadn't even grown or developed into understand relationships. She didn't know anything different.
No. So this is really the question. I'm going to change the question.
Okay, reframe the question.
I'm reframing it because I want you to go somewhere else with this. There are young people today that have never known anything but a Facebook world, a social media world, a technology world.
Right.
Okay? They almost don't even know books. All they know is a smartphone. There are some of us that go all the way back to a time where there was no such thing as a computer in your home. We didn't know what a computer was. A phone was something that was wired into your house.
Clay tablets we had, right?
Well, we had clay tablets too, but those guys are all dead, I think. I may be wrong. I think one might be in somewhere else in the world, but
Clay tablets. Go ahead, Earl.
Anyhow, you messed my question up. What I'm trying to say to you is one thing. Okay, what I'm trying to get to is there are people that don't even know anything, and this Emilia character didn't know any better. She didn't know any better than the way she was living because she started with her brain being embedded by this media. It was the technology had taken us to that level.
It was very isolating.
Right. Nobody had thought about how the technology was going to affect that. So really what your book is doing in such a time as this, and this is why I thought it was important to have an interview with my wife and to talk about her book, not so much to sell the book, even though it'd be nice if you could buy the book, or if your university buys the book, if somebody hears about it, because this is really a textbook.
I'd like that. It's a textbook.
It's a textbook. But the reason why I thought we should talk about it is because we're now at a pinch point where there's generations that have no understanding of dialogue the way we know it. We dialogue. I mean, I watch people in restaurants, young people in restaurants, and they basically text one another across. They don't even talk to one another in a restaurant, like where you and I are trying to have a conversation.
Right.
Now, I was with a friend having breakfast one day, and I saw two really, really old people, and they were doing a different form of cell phones. They were both reading newspapers and not talking to one another. So the idea of not talking to one another is nothing new.
Well, that's what we started with, right? I mean, so
Right.
it's not so we can't lay this at the feet of social media. It has exacerbated
Right.
it. We have to be intentional about wanting relationship and wanting close relationship
And wanting conversation.
and wanting community, right? If we want those things, then we have to have conversation. To have conversation, we need eye contact, we need face-to-face, we need to listen, we need to be intentional. It doesn't just happen.
Right.
That's why I teach communication.
And
That's
to do
what-
that properly, you have to have civility. You have to care enough to listen to one another.
Philippians 4, yes, sir, you're right. Philippians 4, before it says, be anxious for nothing and let everything, let the Lord know everything by prayer and supplication. It starts off in Philippians 4. It says, let your gentleness be made known to all. The Lord is at hand.
Right.
Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. It starts out with let your gentleness be made known to all. That's not terribly American.
Not anymore. It's not.
So
it was.
We
at
need
one
to
point in
recover
time.
some things.
Right. I do think, you and I are talking about, and we talk about this quite often, is that this is really the thing for me. Now I get to go on my soapbox, and I'm not asking you a question about your book at this point, but
I want to hear what you have to say.
my soapbox is very simple these days. I've come to realize that when you choose power and to align yourself with one power, or one side of the power, the other side of the power, or the other, there's billions of people vying for the power, you're missing civility. And you're not happy. You're unhappy in that place because your side's losing one day, winning the next day. And what we want is love.
Exactly.
So I try to boil everything down to a place of coming from a place of love. And love is not some, the Beatles got it right in some respects when they were singing their songs about love, but in actuality, it's not mushy love. It's unconditional love. It's God's love. And that should come through us that know him in that way. And that means we should have bigger ears than anybody else to listen and want to foster conversation and civility in our conversation so that we can see some progress in our world. Because our world is not stopping. Technology is taking us somewhere. We're on a road right now where the sides are vying for which side is better. But in actuality, there's billions of people in the middle that just want civility. They just want to be able to relate to one another. Right. And I think the middle needs to rise up.
That's right.
Not in some wimpy political way I'm talking about in a way of caring for one another and loving one another.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what your book is, building a foundation for how we can, through the different chapters of the book, and we're not going through every chapter by chapter, but it builds the tool, it gives some of the tools needed for the next generation in universities to basically read and understand that we can't continue just beating each other up in the way we've been. We need to listen like we've done before. So what is your favorite chapter in the book?
Earl.
Was that a great segue?
It was, but I wanted to respond to you.
No. I think we need to.
All right, I'm pushing back. I'm saying you said all this juicy, wonderful, delightful stuff about love. And I just want to say, I want to camp there for half a second. The baseline is civility. We want love, but like you're saying, it's not love as the world giveth. It's not the glamour. It's not the hookups. It's a different quality, right? It's true and it's deep. We can't even hope to go there if we don't have a baseline of civility. But who wants to die knowing I was very civil to my wife or I was very civil to my husband? No, we want love. We want more than tolerating and civility, and we want love, but the civility is a baseline. And
Right.
so I wanted to just to affirm what you said there and tell you that, yes, I remembered your question. My favorite chapter, it depends on what day you ask me. Today you're going to ask me that, and I'm going to say chapter 2, Contemplative Silence. I bring in Jean Guyon. I have a chapter in this book called Words and Witnesses. It's not my book. It's edited by Robert Woods and Nathan Wood. I have a chapter in there on Jean Guyon, a deep dive I did into her prayer of silence. And although, again, it's not written for a Christian audience, it is that one chapter where I get to talk about different people in history who were Christians, who really grabbed onto this idea of silence, and it provided sanity for them in the midst of the bubonic plague, in the midst of the Inquisition, in the midst of the Reformation and chopping off of the heads. I mean, it provided sanity, the silence,
Right.
for them. Some days I love the chapter called Ontological Silence because it helps us understand what it means to be a human. Other times I think the chapter on relational silence is my favorite because it really gives us practical application to grow in our relationships through communication. But I would say today, contemplative silence.
Yep. So any parting words, and how do we find this book if we want to buy the book?
I just love you, Mr. Bennett. I thank you for having me here today to do this, just like really talking about my book all I want. Writers don't usually get to do that.
Well, I know some of my subs have let me know that they'd like to see more of you and me talking, so I think we have other subjects. And I would say to those of you that enjoy our banter and us going back and forth, throw some ideas and some topics at us. I mean, we can talk about drums. I can talk about drums.
I can talk about drums too.
I know you can talk about drums.
I can tell stories of big bands.
We can talk about relationships, and we can talk about
children.
But I think faith, yeah, right. And I think that your book and the title of your book really encompasses how we deal with our relationship, in that we try to be civil. Mm-hmm. We both know when we need our silence and our space to think and listen, to help us to listen, and that gives us sanity is our faith and the grounding we have in dialogue and relationship, a relationship that is grounded in dialogue. And a lot of people don't have that. A lot of relationships don't have dialogue. And I think that's one of the things that is missing, because talking at one another like we do on Facebook or with comments, it doesn't necessarily cause dialogue.
Oh, no.
So, I mean, your book really is jumping at that. But
so you asked where they can get it.
Right.
Okay. You can get it on Amazon, either ebook or hardcover like this. If you want to get it, I have a discount code. It is an academic book, so it's going to be kind of pricey. Lexington Print Publishers, kind of high. But I have a 30% discount code if you want to just ask Earl.
And we'll put it in the description on the show this time.
On September 12th.
We'll put a link to Amazon in the description and the discount code.
Right.
If you want it.
September 12th.
And to Breaking.
Oh, yeah, the trilogy.
Yeah, the trilogy, too.
So Biola University has done a podcast with me that's being aired. It's about the book. It's being aired on September 12th. That podcast is called Winsome Conviction. And if anyone wants to listen to that, I'll be on there the 12th, I think, and the 26th of September. So that's coming up. Maybe you'll put that in the show notes. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. Figure out how to do it.
Anyway, I just want to say thank you. And thank you if you've made it this far to listen to two crazy kids who love each other and love talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks
thank
for
you
calling
very
me
much.
a kid.
You are with that little.
Love you.
Love you too, baby. Bye.
Bye, everyone.